The classroom floated in the middle of space. That was the first thing Park Tae-ho noticed when he arrived at the Galactic Academy of Sciences 3 months ago. The walls were made of transparent crystal, and through them he could see stars burning millions of light years away. It was beautiful. Beautiful. It was terrifying. It reminded him every single day that he was very far from home. Tae-ho sat in the back row, Professor Veln's advanced problem-solving class. He always sat in the back. It was easier that way. From the back, he could watch without being watched. He could think without being interrupted. He could exist without being noticed. The other students filled the room with colors and shapes that still surprised him. Kreth sat in the front row, his body made entirely of living crystal that caught the starlight and scattered it into rainbows. Bora floated near the ceiling, a cloud of purple gas that somehow had thoughts and feelings and a very high opinion of itself. There were others too. Beings with too many eyes. Beings with no eyes at all. Beings that existed in dimensions Tae-ho could not even imagine. And then there was him. One human, 24 years old. Brown hair, brown eyes, 2 arms, 2 legs. Nothing special at all. The door at the front of the classroom opened, and Professor Veln entered. The alien teacher was tall, almost 3 meters, with gray skin and 6 arms that moved independently of each other. His 3 eyes scanned the room slowly, counting his students, measuring them, judging them in ways that made Tae-ho feel very small. Professor Veln had been teaching at this academy for 300 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched stars die. He had taught students from species that no longer existed. To him, Tae-ho's entire human civilization was nothing more than a brief flash of light in the endless darkness of time. Today, Professor Veln said, his voice deep and ancient, I present to you a challenge. The students leaned forward. Challenges from Professor Veln were famous across the galaxy. They were impossible. They were legendary. They were the kind of problems that made careers and destroyed egos. One of Professor Veln's 6 arms reached behind his back and produced a cylinder. It was small, about the size of a water bottle from Earth, and it was made of metal so dark it seemed to swallow the light around it. The professor placed it on his desk with a soft click that echoed through the silent room. This, Professor Veln continued, is a container made of vorium alloy. It is one of the strongest materials in the known universe. Inside this container is a stellarite crystal worth more than most planetary systems. A murmur passed through the students. Tae-ho had heard of stellarite. It was rare. It was powerful. A single crystal could power a starship for 1,000 years. The rules are simple, Professor Veln said. Open the container. Take the crystal. It is yours to keep. Kreth's crystalline body flickered with excitement. What tools are we permitted to use, Professor? None. The single word hung in the air like a death sentence. No tools, Professor Veln repeated. No technology. No external devices of any kind. You may use only your body and your mind. Nothing else. Bora, the purple gas cloud, drifted lower from the ceiling. Surely there must be some mechanism. A button. A voice command. Something. There is nothing, Professor Veln said. The container is perfectly sealed. There are no seams. No hinges. No locks. The lid is fused to the body by a vacuum seal so perfect that it has resisted every attempt to open it for 500 years. 500 years. Tae-ho felt something cold settle in his stomach. For 500 years, the greatest minds in the galaxy had tried to open this container. Species with technology so advanced it seemed like magic. Species that could bend space and time. Species that have unlocked the secrets of the universe itself. All of them had failed. In my 3 centuries of teaching, Professor Veln said, No student has ever completed this challenge. Many have tried. All have failed. The container remains sealed. The crystal remains untouched. He looked around the room, his three eyes moving independently, studying each student in turn. But perhaps, he said, this generation will be different. Laughter rippled through the classroom. It was confident laughter, arrogant laughter. These were the best students from the best civilizations in the galaxy. They had technology that humans could not even dream of. They had knowledge accumulated over millions of years. Surely one of them would succeed where others had failed. Taeho did not laugh. He sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the dark cylinder. His mind was already working, turning the problem over and over like a stone in his hand. Kim Yuna caught his attention from across the room. She was the only other human in the class, a 26-year-old physics major with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. Her father was a diplomat, which was the only reason she was allowed to attend the academy. She raised an eyebrow at Taeho, a silent question passing between them. He gave her a small nod. Yes, he was thinking what she was thinking. Yes, this was interesting. Yes, there might be a way. You have 1 week, Professor Vell announced. 1 week to attempt this challenge. After that, the container returns to the Academy vault, and you will have to wait another decade for the next opportunity. The students began talking among themselves, already forming plans, already calculating approaches. Kreth was discussing resonance frequencies with a being made of pure light. Bora was debating electromagnetic manipulation with a creature that existed partially in another dimension, though no one talked to Taeho. No one even looked at him. That was fine. He was used to it. Humans had only been part of the Galactic Council for 50 years. In cosmic terms, that was nothing. Less than nothing. To the ancient civilizations that ruled the stars, humans were children, babies, primitive creatures who had barely learned to walk before they started reaching for the sky. What could a human possibly contribute? Taeho had heard those words 1,000 times since arriving at the academy. They were spoken with amusement, with pity, with contempt. Never with respect. Never with fear. He stood up from his seat and walked toward the front of the classroom. The other students barely noticed him passing. He was invisible, unimportant, a small, fragile creature in a universe of giants. Professor Velm watched him approach with those 3 ancient eyes. There was something in his gaze that Taeho could not read. Curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe just a mild interest one might show a particularly unusual insect. May I examine the container, Professor? Taeho asked. The room went quiet. Students turned to look at him, their alien faces showing various expressions of surprise and amusement. The human wants to look at it, Bora said, his gaseous body rippling with laughter. How adorable. Professor Velm did not laugh. He simply picked up the cylinder and held it out toward Taeho. You may examine it. You may not attempt to open it yet. Not until you are ready to make your official attempt. Taeho took the container. It was heavier than he expected, dense and solid in his hands. The surface was perfectly smooth, without any mark or imperfection. He turned it slowly, studying every angle, every curve. The lid sat on top like it had grown there, like it had never been separate from the body at all. He handed it back to the professor and returned to his seat without saying another word. Yuna was waiting for him with questions in her eyes. But he shook his head slightly. Not here. Not now. Not while everyone was watching and listening and waiting for the foolish human to make a mistake. The class ended, and the students filed out, talking excitedly about the challenge ahead. Kreth's crystal body chimed like bells as he walked. Bora drifted through the walls like a ghost. Strange creatures with strange powers returned to their strange lives. Taeho walked alone through the carved corridors of the academy, his mind still turning over the problem. 500 years. No tools, no technology. Just a sealed container and an impossible challenge. Somewhere in his memory, a voice spoke. It was his grandmother's voice, old and warm and full of wisdom from a planet far away. She was showing him how to open a jar of pickled vegetables, the lid stuck tight from the cold of the refrigerator. "Run it under hot water," she had said, her wrinkled hands guiding his. "The heat makes the metal expand. Simple." Simple. Toho smiled for the first time that day. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe the solution was not complex at all. Maybe the greatest minds in the galaxy had been looking too hard, thinking too big, reaching too far. Maybe they had forgotten the basics. He walked faster, eager to reach his quarters, eager to think, eager to plan. Behind him, the stars burned cold and eternal, watching the small human with his small ideas and his small hopes. They had no idea what was coming. The first attempt came the very next day. Kreth stood at the center of Professor Veln's classroom, his crystalline body catching the starlight and throwing patterns across the walls. He was the brightest student in the academy, the pride of the Solari civilization, a species that had mastered the secrets of molecular vibration 10 million years ago. If anyone could open the container, surely it would be him. Tae-Ho watched from his usual seat in the back row. Kim Yuna sat beside him today, her arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral. Around them, students from a dozen different species had gathered to witness the event. The air was thick with anticipation. "My approach is based on resonant frequency manipulation," Kreth announced, his voice ringing like a struck bell. "Every material in the universe vibrates at a specific frequency. If I can match the natural frequency of the Vorium alloy and amplify it, the molecular bonds will weaken and the seal will fail." Professor Velm nodded slowly, his three eyes fixed on the cylinder sitting on the desk before Kreth. "You may begin." Kreth placed his crystalline hands on either side of the container. His body began to hum. The sound started low, almost below the range of human hearing, and slowly rose in pitch. Higher and higher. The crystal patterns in his skin shifted and changed, forming complex geometric shapes that Tae-Ho did not recognize. The container did not move. Kreth pushed harder. His entire body was vibrating now, shaking with such intensity that the air around him seemed to blur. The sound became painful, a high-pitched whine that made Tae-Ho cover his ears. Other students flinched and stepped back. Still, the container sat unmoved on the desk. Perfect. Silent. Mocking. After 10 minutes, Kreth stopped. His crystalline body flickered with exhaustion, and small cracks appeared along his arms before slowly healing. He stared at the container with something that might have been disbelief. "The alloy," he said finally, "absorbs all vibrational energy. It does not resonate. It cannot be affected by frequency manipulation." Professor Veln's expression did not change. "A valuable discovery. Who will attempt next?" Bora drifted forward from the ceiling, his purple gaseous form swirling with confidence. "The Solari approach was too primitive," he said, and Kreth's crystal body flashed with anger at the insult. "The Nephian method is far more sophisticated." Tae-Ho leaned forward slightly, interested despite himself. The Nephians were beings of pure energy who had learned to manipulate electromagnetic fields with perfect precision. They could move objects without touching them, change the flow of electricity with a thought, even affect the behavior of light itself. Bora surrounded the container with his gaseous body. Purple tendrils of energy reached out, probing the surface, searching for weaknesses. The air crackled with power. "I am generating a localized electromagnetic field," Bora explained, his voice echoing strangely. "By manipulating the molecular polarity of the Vorium alloy, I can force the atoms to realign. The seal will simply come apart." The energy field intensified. Sparks flew. The lights in the classroom flickered and dimmed. Some students moved toward the exits, afraid of what might happen. The container sat perfectly still. Bora pushed harder. More energy. More power. The entire room was filled with purple light now, and Taiho could feel the hair on his arms standing up from the static charge. Then something cracked. For one brief moment, Taiho thought Bora had succeeded. But the sound had not come from the container. It had come from the desk. The wooden surface had split down the middle from the electromagnetic stress, and the container had fallen through the gap, landing on the floor with a heavy thunk. When the light faded and the energy dispersed, the container lay there unchanged. Not a scratch. Not a mark. The vacuum seal remained perfect. Bora's gaseous form flickered with frustration. "The alloy is magnetically neutral," he said, his voice tight with anger. "It does not respond to electromagnetic manipulation." "Another valuable discovery," Professor Velm said calmly. He picked up the container with one of his 6 arms and placed it on a new desk. "Who is next?" The attempts continued throughout the week. A being made of pure light tried to burn through the seal with concentrated photons. The container absorbed the light completely, its dark surface growing not even slightly warm. A creature with 4 arms and skin like bark tried to use biological acid secreted from its pores. The acid sizzled and evaporated on contact, leaving the Vorium alloy untouched. A small, insect-like alien with compound eyes tried telepathic manipulation, attempting to convince the container at a molecular level to open itself. Nothing happened except that the alien developed a severe headache. One student, a being that existed partially in another dimension, tried to reach through dimensional barriers and pull the crystal out without opening the container at all. The attempt caused a small reality tear that took Professor Velm 3 hours to repair. The container remained sealed through all of this. Taiho watched. He sat in his back row seat, day after day, taking notes on his tablet, observing every attempt, studying every failure. He did not speak. He did not offer suggestions. He simply watched and learned and thought. The other students began to notice his silence. "The human has not tried yet," Kreth observed on the 4th day, his crystal body still showing faint cracks from his failed attempt. "Is he afraid?" Bora's purple form rippled with amusement. What could a human possibly do? Their species still uses chemical rockets to travel between planets. They discovered fire only a few 100,000 years ago. They are barely more than animals. Taiho heard the words, but he did not react. He had heard worse. Much worse. On his first day at the academy, a student had asked him if humans still lived in caves. Another had wanted to know if it was true that humans ate their dead. A third had simply refused to believe that a species so young and primitive could produce individuals capable of higher thought. Yuna, however, was less tolerant. She stood up from her seat, her eyes flashing with anger. "The human has a name," she said, her voice cold. "His name is Park Taiho, and he has every right to attempt this challenge, just like the rest of you." Bora's gaseous form swirled dismissively. "The female human defends her mate. How touching. How primitive." "He is not my mate," Yuna said through clenched teeth. "He is my friend. And I promise you, he is smarter than anyone in this room." The classroom erupted in laughter. Alien sounds of amusement filled the air. Clicking, humming, whistling, buzzing. Each species had its own way of expressing mockery, and they all expressed it now. Taiho reached out and gently touched Yuna's arm. "Sit down," he said quietly. "It does not matter what they think." Yuna looked at him, her eyes still angry, but she sat down beside him. "How can you just ignore them?" She whispered. "They treat us like we are nothing, because to them, we are nothing," Taiho replied. "Our civilization is 50,000 years old. Theirs are millions of years old. Compared to them, we are babies taking our first steps. But that does not make us stupid. No, Tejo agreed. It just makes us different. Professor Velm had been watching this exchange with his three ancient eyes. There was something in his gaze now that had not been there before. Interest, perhaps, or recognition. The look of a teacher who had seen something unexpected in a student. Park Tejo, the professor said, and the classroom fell silent. You have observed every attempt this week. You have taken notes. You have studied each failure. Yet you have not tried anything yourself. Why? Tejo stood slowly, feeling every alien eye in the room turn toward him. Because I am still thinking, Professor. And what are you thinking about? Tejo paused, choosing his words carefully. I am thinking about how complex all the attempts have been. Resonance frequencies, electromagnetic fields, dimensional manipulation. These are advanced techniques from advanced civilizations. And the container has resisted them all. For 500 years, the greatest minds in the galaxy have tried to open it using the most advanced methods available. All have failed. Professor Velm leaned forward slightly. Your point? My point, Tejo said, is that maybe advanced methods are the wrong approach. Maybe the solution is not complex at all. Maybe it is simple. The laughter started again, louder this time. Kreth's crystal body chimed with amusement. Bora's gaseous form practically vibrated with mockery. Simple, Kreth repeated. The human thinks the solution is simple. After species with millions of years of scientific knowledge have failed, this primitive creature thinks he can succeed with simplicity. Tejo did not respond to the mockery. He simply looked at Professor Velm. Waiting. The ancient teacher studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, something changed in his expression. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. I look forward to your attempt, Park Tejo, Professor Velm said. The challenge remains open for 3 more days. Tejo nodded and sat back down. Beside him, Yuna was staring at him with wide eyes. Do you actually have a plan? She whispered. Tejo looked at the dark cylinder sitting on the professor's desk. 500 years of failure. Millions of years of advanced technology. And one impossible seal. Yes, he said softly. I think I do. That night, alone in his quarters with the stars burning outside his window, Tejo began to work through his idea step by step. Kim Yuna knocked on Tejo's door late that night. The academy was quiet at this hour, most of its alien students resting in whatever strange ways their species required. Some slept like humans did. Others entered meditation states that lasted for days. A few simply stopped moving and waited for morning. Te-Ho opened the door and stepped aside to let her in. His small room was simple compared to the quarters given to other students. A bed, a desk, a window looking out at the stars. On the desk, he had spread out dozens of drawings and notes, all focused on the same thing, the container. You have been working all night, Yuna said, looking at the scattered papers. I could see your light from across the corridor. I could not sleep, Tejo admitted. My mind will not stop thinking about the problem. Yuna picked up one of his drawings. It showed the container from the side, with careful measurements and annotations. Tell me, she said. What are you thinking? Tejo sat down on the edge of his bed and ran his hands through his hair. He looked tired, but there was a light in his eyes that Yuna had not seen before. Excitement, hope, the look of someone who had found something important. I have been watching the other students all week, he said. Kreth with his vibrations. Bora with his electromagnetic fields. All of them using the most advanced techniques their civilizations have developed over millions of years. And all of them failed, Yuna said. Yes, but why did they fail? Yuna frowned, thinking, because the Vorium alloy is resistant to those methods. It absorbs vibration. It is magnetically neutral. It cannot be affected by the techniques they used. True, Taiho agreed. But I think there is a deeper reason. I think they failed because they were thinking too big, too complex, too advanced. What do you mean? Taiho stood up and walked to his desk. He picked up a sketch showing two cylinders, one inside the other, representing the lid and the body of the container. The container is made of two pieces, he said. The lid and the body. They are sealed together by a vacuum. There is no air between them, so they are held together by the pressure of the atmosphere outside. That is basic physics, Yuna said. Exactly. Basic physics. The kind we learned in school when we were children. Taiho tapped the drawing. Now, here's the question. What happens to metal when it gets hot? Yuna's eyes widened slightly. It expands, and when it gets cold, it contracts. Yes. Taiho set down the drawing and looked at Yuna directly. The lid and the body are both made of Vorium alloy, but they are separate pieces. They were manufactured separately, probably at different times, maybe even in different facilities, which means they almost certainly have slightly different compositions. Yuna was starting to understand. Her expression changed from curiosity to amazement. Different compositions means different thermal expansion coefficients. Exactly. When the temperature changes, the lid and the body will expand or contract at slightly different rates. If I cycle the temperature enough times, hot to cold, cold to hot, the tiny differences will add up. The seal will weaken. Eventually, it will break. For a long moment, Yuna said nothing. She just stared at Taiho with an expression he could not quite read. That is it? She finally said, That is your plan? Temperature changes? That is it. But it is so simple. Taiho smiled. I know. Yuna sat down heavily on the single chair in the room. She shook her head slowly, not in disagreement, but in wonder. 500 years, she said. For 500 years, the greatest minds in the galaxy have tried to open that container. They used resonance manipulation, electromagnetic fields, dimensional shifting, telepathy, every advanced technique imaginable. And none of them thought to just heat it up and cool it down. Taiho finished. How is that possible? How could they miss something so obvious? Taiho leaned against his desk, looking out the window at the distant stars. Because they forgot, he said quietly. Their civilizations are millions of years old. They have technology that can reshape reality itself. They have moved so far beyond basic physics that they do not even think about it anymore. But we do, Yuna said. But we do. Humans are young, primitive, as they keep reminding us. We still remember what it was like to have nothing but our hands and our minds. We still solve problems the old way, the simple way, because we have not had time to forget. Yuna laughed softly. My grandmother used to do this. When a jar lid was stuck, she would run it under hot water to loosen it. My grandmother too, Taiho said, and the memory made him smile. She taught me that trick when I was 5 years old. I never forgot it. So your plan to solve an impossible challenge that has defeated the galaxies, greatest minds for 500 years is basically the same thing your grandmother taught you when you were a child, yes. Yuna laughed again, louder this time. Taiho, that is either brilliant or completely insane. Maybe it is both. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the moment settling around them. Outside the window, a ship passed by, its lights blinking against the darkness. Somewhere in the academy, alien students were sleeping and dreaming alien dreams. There is one problem, Yuna said eventually. The rules say no tools, no technology, How are you going to change the temperature of the container without using any devices? Taeho nodded. He had thought about this. The Academy has environmental control systems in every room. They adjust temperature, humidity, air pressure. It is part of the building, not a separate tool. Will Professor Velln allow that? I think so. The rules say no tools, no external devices. But environmental conditions were never restricted. If I can convince him to let me use a temperature-controlled chamber, I should be within the rules. Yuna considered this. It is a risk. He might say no. He might. But I do not think he will. Taeho remembered the way Professor Velln had looked at him in class, the strange interest in those three ancient eyes. I think he wants to see what I will do. Why? Because in 300 years of teaching, no one has ever approached this challenge the way I'm approaching it. He is curious. Yuna stood up and walked to stand beside him at the window. They looked out at the stars together, two small humans in a vast and ancient universe. When will you make your attempt? She asked. Tomorrow. The challenge ends in 3 days, but I do not want to wait. The longer I wait, the more time I have to doubt myself. Are you nervous? Taeho thought about the question honestly. Yes, he admitted. I am terrified. What if I am wrong? What if my simple idea fails just like all the complex ones? What if I stand up in front of the whole class and prove that humans really are just primitive creatures who do not belong here? Yuna reached out and took his hand. Her grip was warm and firm. And what if you succeed? Then everything changes. How so? Taeho turned to look at her. If I succeed, it will not just be about opening a container. It will be about proving that humans have something to offer, that our perspective has value, that being young and simple is not the same as being weak and stupid. That is a lot of pressure for one physics experiment. I know. Taeho smiled, but there was tension in it. But someone has to go first. Someone has to show them what humans can do. It might as well be me. They stood together until the artificial dawn began to brighten the windows of the academy. Yuna eventually went back to her own quarters to rest, but Taeho could not sleep. He spent the remaining hours going over his plan again and again, looking for flaws, checking his reasoning, preparing himself for what was to come. The sun rose over the Galactic Academy of Sciences, casting long shadows through the crystal walls. Students began to stir, to move, to fill the corridors with their strange sounds and stranger shapes. Park Taeho got dressed, gathered his notes, and walked toward Professor Velln's classroom with his heart pounding in his chest. Today, he would either prove that humanity belonged among the stars, or confirm everything the galaxy already believed about his species. Either way, nothing would be the same after this. He thought about his grandmother back on Earth, about her warm smile and her simple wisdom. He thought about all the humans who had looked up at the sky and wondered what was out there. He thought about the 50 years of struggle that had brought humanity to this point. This moment, this chance. The door to the classroom appeared before him. Through the crystal walls, he could see Professor Velln waiting inside, the dark cylinder sitting on his desk like a challenge and a promise. Taeho took a deep breath. Then he opened the door and walked in. The classroom fell silent as Park Taeho walked through the door. Every alien face turned toward him, every strange eye fixed upon his small human form. He could feel their judgment pressing against him like a physical weight. Professor Velln stood at the front of the room, his 6 arms folded across his chest, his 3 eyes watching Taeho approach with that same unreadable expression. The dark cylinder sat on his desk, unchanged, unmoved, still holding its secret after 500 years of failure. Park Taeho, the professor said. You wish to make your attempt? Yes, Professor. A ripple of amusement passed through the students. Kreth's crystalline body chimed softly. Bora's purple gaseous form swirled with barely contained mockery. Other aliens shifted and whispered in their various languages, all saying variations of the same thing. The human thinks he can succeed where we failed. Kim. Yuna had slipped into the room behind Taiho. She found a seat near the back, her face pale but determined. She believed in him. That knowledge gave Taiho strength. "Very well," Professor Velm said. "State your approach." Taiho cleared his throat. His heart was beating so fast he thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "I request access to the Academy's temperature-controlled environment chamber," he said. "I intend to subject the container to cycles of heating and cooling." The silence that followed was different from before. It was confused, puzzled. The alien students looked at each other, trying to understand what they had just heard. "Temperature cycles?" Kreth repeated. "That is your approach? You want to make it hot and cold?" "Yes." Bora's gaseous form rippled with disbelief. "That is absurd. Heating and cooling?" The Vorium alloy has a thermal stability range of -200 to +3,000 degrees. Temperature changes will not affect it. "The alloy itself, no," Taiho agreed. "But the seal is not made entirely of alloy. It is made of two pieces of alloy pressed together by a vacuum. And those two pieces may not be exactly identical." Professor Velm's three eyes narrowed slightly. "Explain." Taiho took a deep breath and began. "The container has a lid and a body. Both are made of Vorium alloy, but they are separate components manufactured independently. Even with perfect quality control, there will be tiny differences in their molecular structure. Different impurities. Different crystalline formations. These differences are too small to matter in normal conditions. But," Professor Velm prompted, "but they will cause the lid and body to expand and contract at slightly different rates when the temperature changes. If I cycle the temperature enough times, these tiny differences will accumulate. The seal will weaken. Eventually, it will fail." The classroom was completely silent now. Not mocking silence. Not confused silence. This was the silence of beings who were beginning to understand something unexpected. Kreth stepped forward, his crystal body flickering with thought. "Thermal expansion coefficients," he said slowly. "Different rates of expansion based on material composition." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet. "I never considered that." "Neither did I," Bora admitted, his purple form dimming slightly. "We focused on the alloy's properties, its resistance to our methods. We never thought about the seal itself as a mechanical system with physical components." Professor Velm was studying Taiho with an intensity that made the young human want to step back. But he held his ground, waiting for the verdict. "The environment chamber is part of the Academy's climate control system," the professor said finally. "It is not a tool. It is not a device. It is simply a room with adjustable conditions." He paused. "Your request is within the rules." Taiho felt relief flood through him. "Thank you, Professor." "Do not thank me yet. You have not succeeded." Professor Velm picked up the dark cylinder and held it out to Taiho. "Let us see if your simple physics is as effective as you believe." The entire class followed them to the environment chamber. It was a large room with white walls and no windows, filled with sensors and monitoring equipment. The temperature inside could be adjusted from nearly absolute zero to temperatures hot enough to melt most metals. Taiho placed the container on a platform in the center of the room. His hands were shaking slightly, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was it. This was the moment. "I will begin with extreme cold," he said, moving to the control panel. "Then I will raise the temperature rapidly, then cool it again. I will repeat this cycle multiple times. How long will this take? Professor Velm asked. I do not know, Taeho admitted. Maybe minutes. Maybe hours. It depends on how different the expansion coefficients actually are. The professor nodded. We will wait. Taeho entered the first commands. The chamber's temperature began to drop. Frost formed on the walls. The container sat unchanged on its platform, dark and silent and seemingly invincible. -50 degrees. -100. -150. Nothing visible happened to the container. The alien students watching through the observation window began to shift restlessly. Then Taeho reversed the process. The temperature climbed rapidly. The frost evaporated. Heat filled the chamber, shimmer visible in the air. +100 degrees. +200. +300. Still nothing. Back to cold. Then to hot. Then cold again. Time passed. Minutes became an hour. The alien students grew bored and frustrated. Some left, convinced the humans' attempt would fail just like all the others. Kreth stayed. So did Bora, so did Professor Velm, and so did Kim Yuna, her face pressed against the observation window, her eyes never leaving the dark cylinder. Taeho did not stop. He kept cycling the temperature, again and again, pushing the container through extreme cold and extreme heat over and over. His own body was sweating despite the climate control, his stress visible in his clenched jaw and tight shoulders. What if I was wrong? The thought kept pushing into his mind. What if the coefficients are too similar? What if the seal is too strong? What if this fails just like everything else? He pushed the thoughts away and kept working. After 90 minutes, something changed. It was subtle. So subtle that Taeho almost missed it. A tiny sound, barely audible over the hum of the climate control systems. A soft creak, like metal settling. He stopped the temperature cycling and stared at the container through the observation window. Had he imagined it? What was that? Kreth asked, his crystal body suddenly alert. I do not know, Taeho said. His mouth was dry. His heart was pounding. I need to check. He entered the chamber, the heat still lingering in the air from the last cycle. The container sat on its platform, looking exactly the same as it had when he started. But when he picked it up, he felt something different. Something had changed. The lid did not feel as tightly fused to the body as before. There was the slightest give, the smallest movement. His hands were shaking badly now. He gripped the lid and twisted. Nothing. He gripped harder and twisted again. And then he heard it. A soft pop. The sound of a vacuum seal breaking after 500 years of perfect closure. The lid rotated in his hands. For a moment, Taeho could not believe it. He stood frozen, the lid turning under his fingers, his brain refusing to accept what was happening. Then he pulled the lid off completely, and a light filled the chamber. Inside the container, nestled in a cradle of black foam, was the stellarite crystal. It glowed with an inner fire, brilliant and beautiful, worth more than most planets. The observation window exploded with sound. Alien voices raised in shock, disbelief, wonder. Professor Velm's 3 eyes were wide, wider than Taeho had ever seen them. Yuna was crying. Tears were streaming down her face, and she was laughing at the same time. A sound of pure joy and relief. Taeho walked out of the chamber, the open container in his hands, the crystal gleaming inside. The remaining students parted before him, their expressions ranging from stunned to amazed to confused. He stopped in front of Professor Velm and held out the container. Simple physics, he said. Quietly. Professor Velm reached out with one of his 6 arms and took the container. He examined the open lid, the broken seal, the crystal within. Then he looked at Taeho with those 3 ancient eyes, and for the first time in the entire week, He smiled. In 300 years of teaching, the professor said. His voice filled with wonder. I have never seen anything like this. Kreth stepped forward. His crystal body dimmed with something that looked like shame. I owe you an apology, he said to Taeho. I mocked you. I dismissed you. I thought your species had nothing to offer. So did I, Bora admitted, his purple form swirling uncertainly. We all did. Taeho looked at them both. He thought about all the insults he had endured, all the mockery, all the dismissal. He thought about how easy it would be to throw those words back at them now, to rub their failure in their faces. But that was not who he was. That was not what this moment was about. You had every reason to doubt me, he said simply. Your civilizations have accomplished incredible things. You have knowledge and technology far beyond anything humans have achieved. I do not blame you for thinking we had nothing to contribute. But we were wrong, Kreth said. Taeho smiled. Maybe. Or maybe you were just looking at things from the wrong angle. That is what different perspectives are for. To see what others miss. The crystal continued to glow in the container, casting its light across the room, across the gathered students. News of Taeho's success spread through the Galactic Academy of Sciences like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every student and professor on the station had heard the story. The human had done it. The primitive, young, simple human had opened the container that had defeated the greatest minds in the galaxy for 500 years. The reactions were mixed. Some aliens refused to believe it at first. There must be some mistake, some trick, some hidden technology the human had smuggled into the challenge. But Professor Veln confirmed the truth himself, showing anyone who asked the broken seal, the open lid, the gleaming crystal inside. Simple physics. Thermal expansion. The most basic principle in the universe, used in a way that millions of years of advanced thinking had never considered. 3 days after his success, Taeho stood in Professor Veln's classroom once again. But this time, he was not sitting in the back row trying to be invisible. He was standing at the front, next to the professor, facing a crowd of students that had grown far beyond the original class. They had come from all departments, all disciplines, all species. They had come to see the human who had done the impossible. Professor Veln raised one of his 6 arms, and the room fell silent. Today, the ancient teacher began. We discussed what happened in this room 1 week ago. Not just the opening of the container, but what it means, what it teaches us. He gestured to Taeho. Park Taeho, you solved the problem that my students have been attempting for 3 centuries. Tell us how. Taeho cleared his throat. He was still not comfortable with this much attention, but he had accepted that hiding was no longer an option. I watched the other students make their attempts, he said. They used incredible techniques. Resonance manipulation, electromagnetic fields, dimensional shifting. Each one was more advanced than anything my species has ever developed. And each one failed, Professor Veln added. Yes, but I noticed something. Every approach was complex. Every solution assumed that the problem required advanced methods to solve. No one considered that the answer might be simple. Why not? A student called from the crowd. Why did none of us think of basic thermal physics? Taeho paused, choosing his words carefully. Because you forgot, he said. Your civilizations are millions of years old. You have technology that can reshape the fabric of reality. You have moved so far beyond basic principles that they no longer seem relevant to you. But to humans, they are still relevant, Professor Veln said. It was not a question. Yes, humans are young. We have only been solving problems for a few 100,000 years. We still remember what it is like to have nothing but our hands and our minds. We still think in simple terms because we have not had time to learn any other way. The room was silent, absorbing his words. Taeho continued. When I was 5 years old, my grandmother taught me how to open a stuck jar lid. She told me to run it under hot water. The heat expands the metal, loosens the seal, and the lid comes off. I have used that trick my whole life. It never occurred to me that it would stop working just because the jar was made of a fancier material. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some of the students were looking at each other, confusion and realization mixing on their alien faces. Professor Velm stepped forward, his 3 eyes sweeping across the assembled students. This is the lesson, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. This is what I have been trying to teach for 300 years, and what I have finally been given a perfect example of. He picked up the now empty container from his desk and held it up for everyone to see. We build on the knowledge of those who came before us. Each generation adds to what the previous generation discovered. This is how civilizations advance. But there is a danger in this process. The more we build, the more we forget what lies at the foundation. He set the container down and looked directly at Taeho. The Galactic Council admitted humanity 50 years ago. Many species opposed this decision. They argued that humans were too young, too primitive, too simple to contribute to galactic civilization. They asked what a species that still uses chemical rockets could possibly offer to societies that travel between stars. And now? Kreth asked from his seat in the front row. His crystal body was dimmed with what looked like genuine curiosity. And now we have our answer, Professor Velm said. Humanity offers perspective. A fresh set of eyes that can see what we have long forgotten. A mind that is not burdened by millions of years of assumptions. A willingness to try simple solutions when complex ones fail. He turned to Taeho and bowed. It was a small gesture, just a slight incline of his tall body, but the significance was enormous. In all his 300 years of teaching, Professor Velm had never bowed to a student. Thank you, Park Taeho, he said. You have reminded us of something important. Taeho bowed back, deeper than the professor had. Thank you for giving me the chance to try. After the lecture ended and the students dispersed, Taeho found himself alone with Kim Yuna in the corridor outside the classroom. She was smiling at him in a way that made him feel embarrassed and proud at the same time. You were amazing in there, she said. You spoke like a real teacher. I was terrified the whole time, Taeho admitted. It did not show. She reached out and squeezed his arm. So what now? You are famous throughout the academy. Maybe throughout the whole galaxy. The human who opened the impossible container. Taeho reached into his pocket and pulled out the stellarite crystal. Professor Velm had given it to him as promised. It glowed softly in his palm, casting warm light across both their faces. Here, he said, holding it out to her. Yuna's eyes widened. What? No, Taeho. You cannot give this to me. It is worth more than entire planets. You want it. I do not want it. What do you mean you do not want it? It is worth a fortune. Taeho smiled. I did not do this for the crystal. I did it to solve the problem. That was the reward I wanted. Yuna stared at him, then at the crystal, then back at him. You are crazy, she said finally. Probably. You are giving away something worth more than I could earn in 1,000 lifetimes. Yes. Why? Taeho thought about the question. Why had he done it? Not for money or fame or respect. Not to prove anything to the aliens who had mocked him. Not even to represent humanity, though that had been part of it. Because solving the problem was enough, he said. The moment I heard that seal pop, when I knew I had been right, that my simple idea had worked when all the complex ones had failed. That was the reward. Everything else is just extra. Yuna took the crystal slowly, holding it like it might shatter in her hands. I do not know what to say. Say you will use it well. Maybe it can help fund your research, or your father's diplomatic work, or something else important. She looked at the crystal for a long moment, then carefully put it in her pocket. When she looked back at Taeho, there were tears in her eyes again. "Thank you," she said, "for this and for everything. For showing them what humans can do." "We showed them together," Taeho said. "I could not have done it without your support." They walked together through the crystal corridors of the academy, the stars burning eternal outside the transparent walls. Somewhere behind them, the empty container sat on Professor Veln's desk, a testament to 500 years of failure and one moment of simple success. As they walked, Taeho heard footsteps approaching from behind. He turned to see Kreth, the Solari student who had been the first to attempt the challenge and the first to mock Taeho for his simplicity. The crystalline alien stopped in front of Taeho, his body flickering with colors that seemed to indicate uncertainty. For a moment, he did not speak. "Taeho," he finally said, "I have a request." "What is it?" Kreth's crystal form dimmed slightly. This was clearly difficult for him. "Would you teach me about simple physics?" Taeho blinked, surprised. "Teach you?" "Yes. I have studied advanced physics for 200 years. I have mastered techniques that your species has not even discovered yet. But I do not know the basics. I have forgotten them, or maybe I never truly learned them at all." He paused. "I do not want to make the same mistake again." Taeho looked at the alien who had called him primitive, who had laughed at his species, who had been so confident in his own superiority. Now that same alien was asking a human for help. "Yes," Taeho said. "I will teach you." Kreth's crystal body brightened. "Thank you. I am grateful, on one condition. Anything. You teach me too. About resonance frequencies, about molecular vibration, about all the advanced techniques your species has developed. I think we both have a lot to learn from each other." Kreth considered this for a moment. Then, slowly, his crystal form chimed in. What Taeho had learned was the Solari expression of agreement and pleasure. "That seems fair," Kreth said. "Perhaps this is what the Galactic Council hoped for when they admitted your species. Not for humans to teach us, or for us to teach humans, but for both." "Perhaps," Taeho agreed. They parted ways, each heading to their own quarters, each carrying new understanding. Yuna watched Kreth go, then turned to Taeho with a look of amazement. "Did that just happen?" She asked. "Did a Solari just ask a human to teach him physics?" "I think so," Taeho said, still a little surprised himself. "Things really are going to change now, are they not?" Taeho looked out the window at the stars.